Hey guys, tonight we're doing one of those stories that sounds fake, but absolutely is not. So dim the lights, lower the volume just a little more than usual, get comfortable, and let your brain slowly clock out. Because tonight we're floating back to ancient Rome, a place famous for roads, baths, togas, and the general vibe of people doing crimes so creatively that lawmakers had to stop whatever they were doing and say, okay, who did this? And why are you like this? Ancient Rome loved laws. Romans absolutely adored rules. They carved them in stone. They nailed them to walls. They recited them dramatically in public. But the thing about Roman laws is that many of them didn't exist. Because society calmly agreed on morality, they existed because one specific person found a loophole, exploited it with confidence, and forced the Senate to panic legislate. This is the story of those laws. Laws that only existed because one criminal was, unfortunately, very smart. Or at least smarter than everyone expected. Which is honestly worse. Let's ease into this with the Roman obsession with technicalities. Romans were not big on vibes. They loved precise wording. If something wasn't specifically illegal, then congratulations, it was legal. And this led to a long-running tradition where criminals didn't exactly break the law. They aggressively misunderstood it. And Rome responded the only way it knew how, by writing another law, usually very annoyed, sometimes petty, occasionally hilarious. So let's start with one of my favorites, the law against nighttime meetings. Because, of course, there was one. Early Rome had a serious anxiety problem about groups of people gathering after dark. If people were meeting at night, Romans assumed one of three things: a political conspiracy, a religious cult, or a really intense dinner party, all of which were terrifying to the Senate. So there were laws limiting assemblies after sunset. Very clear. Very firm. No nighttime meetings. Simple. Until one guy decided to host meetings at night. But hear me out. He didn't call them meetings. He called them funerals. This man figured out that Roman law allowed people to gather at night for funeral rites. Mourning had exemptions. So he would announce that someone had died. Not a specific person, just someone, and then host a funeral at night, with speeches and planning, and, shockingly, 0 dead bodies. He did this repeatedly. The Senate eventually realized that no one in this man's neighborhood was actually dying at this alarming rate. And instead of asking questions like, why are our laws so easy to exploit? They passed a new law. Funeral gatherings must involve an actual corpse. Because, yes, someone had to write that down. And that's kind of the theme tonight. Laws that read like they were written after a very long day. Now let's gently drift over to inheritance laws. Romans cared deeply about inheritance. Family lines, property, names, legacy, all of it mattered, especially to rich Romans, especially to senators, especially to people who were absolutely convinced their relatives were out to get them, which, to be fair, they often were. There was a rule that limited how much money you could inherit if you weren't a close family member. This was meant to stop manipulation, like charming some old guy into leaving you everything. A noble goal. Unfortunately, One man realized that the law specified inheritance, but didn't say anything about gifts given. Shortly before death, so he befriended elderly wealthy citizens, became incredibly attentive, very caring, almost suspiciously so, and then encouraged them to give him gifts, not inheritance, gifts, while they were still alive, usually days before they died. Totally legal, technically generous, morally horrifying. Rome responded by creating laws restricting deathbed gifts. Because again, someone had to be that guy, and Rome kept collecting those guys. Let's talk about marriage laws. Because Rome loved regulating who could marry whom, how often, and for what reasons. Especially Augustus. Augustus was obsessed with marriage. He wanted Romans married, producing babies, preferably Roman babies, preferably legitimate, preferably named Augustus at some point. So Augustus passed laws rewarding marriage and punishing bachelorhood. Single men lost certain legal privileges. Married men with children got benefits. All very pro-family, very wholesome. On paper, enter one man who decided to marry, repeatedly, very briefly. He would marry a woman, divorce her almost immediately, marry another, divorce again, over and over, always technically married, always qualifying for benefits, never actually committed to anyone. Augustus was not amused, so Rome passed additional laws limiting divorce frequency. Because apparently the concept of serial speed marriage had not been anticipated. Let's slowly wander into theft. Roman theft laws were surprisingly nuanced. There were distinctions between stealing by day and stealing by night. Night theft was worse, more dangerous, more suspicious, more threatening, so penalties were harsher. Naturally, someone decided to steal during twilight, not day, not night, twilight, and argued that the sun was still visible. Therefore, daytime theft, lighter punishment. The court argued about this. Seriously, they debated the sun's position. Eventually, Rome updated its legal definitions of night and day. Because of one guy with very strong opinions about sunsets. And Rome kept doing this. Over and over. One criminal, one loophole, one new law. Now let's talk about something delightfully Roman. Public nudity. Romans were weirdly casual about bodies. Baths, sports, art, all fine. But there were still limits. You weren't supposed to appear naked in public spaces outside specific contexts, especially not in political or legal situations. One man decided to show up naked to court. His argument was that the law prohibited clothing associated with certain social classes. Senators couldn't wear certain garments. Commoners couldn't wear others. But nudity wasn't mentioned, so he wore nothing. The court was furious. The spectators were uncomfortable, and the law was promptly updated to require appropriate attire. Because yes, someone tried this. Let's float gently into poison laws. Because Rome had a poison problem. People loved poisoning each other. Quietly. Politely, with wine. So there were laws against selling poison. Pretty straightforward. Until someone argued that what they sold wasn't poison. It was medicine. That happened to kill people if taken incorrectly, which, inconveniently, was how it was being taken. Rome responded by regulating substances that could be used as poison even if they had medicinal uses. This is why Roman law texts start sounding like a pharmacist's nightmare. Now here's one of my favorite categories. Laws about mourning. Romans had rules about how much grief was appropriate. You couldn't mourn too loudly or too long, especially women. Roman lawmakers were deeply uncomfortable with emotional women. Shockingly, there were limits on public wailing, limits on clothing, limits on hair pulling, until one woman decided to mourn silently. No wailing, no dramatic gestures, just constant, passive presence. She followed officials, sat outside buildings, appeared everywhere dressed in mourning clothes, perfectly within the rules, and completely unsettling. Rome eventually passed laws limiting prolonged mourning displays, because apparently quiet grief was worse. Let's drift toward food laws. Romans regulated luxury. They didn't want citizens spending too much on banquets, moral decay, and all that. So there were limits on how much you could spend on food per meal. One man hosted extremely expensive dinners, but only served one dish, technically within budget per item. Lavishly prepared, rare ingredients, ridiculously priced single plates. Rome had to clarify that total meal cost mattered, not item count, because of course they did. This brings us to clothing. Sumptuary laws regulated what you could wear based on class, colors, fabrics, jewelry, all controlled. Purple was especially restricted. Only certain elites could wear it. One man dyed his clothing in multiple lighter shades that collectively appeared purple. He argued it wasn't technically purple. It was a combination of colors. The Senate disagreed, loudly, and clarified dye laws. Again, now let's slow things down with something softer. Wills. Roman wills were formal, witnessed, carefully worded, until one man left his inheritance to his dog. Not a metaphor. The dog. He argued that the law didn't explicitly prohibit animals as heirs. Rome fixed that quickly. Dogs were disappointed. And finally, let's end this part with a law about insults. Romans loved insults, satire, mockery, public humiliation. All popular, but there were limits. You couldn't damage someone's reputation with false claims. One man avoided this by telling technically true, but wildly misleading statements. He didn't lie, he just curated facts. Rome eventually addressed malicious truth-telling, which is maybe the most Roman thing imaginable. And that's where we'll gently pause for tonight's first stretch. Ancient Rome, a civilization so confident in its laws, and yet constantly outplayed by individuals who read them very carefully. Because sometimes history isn't shaped by emperors or generals. Sometimes it's shaped by one guy who asked, "Yeah, but where does it say I can't?" By this point in Roman history, lawmakers were no longer optimistic. They didn't assume citizens would behave well. They assumed citizens would behave creatively, and they were correct. Asterisk, let's start with a law about witnesses. Roman courts relied heavily on witness testimony. Spoken word mattered. Reputation mattered. Who said what, and how confidently they said it, could decide everything. Naturally, someone realized that the law required witnesses, but it didn't require them to stay consistent. Asterisk so this one man would testify calmly, clearly, then come back later and testify again, equally calmly, completely differently. When questioned, he argued that the law did not forbid changing one's mind, which is technically true, annoying, but true. So Rome introduced penalties for contradictory testimony, because apparently "don't lie twice" had to be formalized. Asterisk now let's float toward contracts. Romans loved contracts, written agreements, handshakes backed by gods. Very serious business. But early contracts focused heavily on intent and wording, not behavior after the fact. Asterisk one man signed contracts, accepted payment, then intentionally made himself unavailable. Not absent, just inconveniently unreachable. He didn't break the contract, he just never fulfilled it. When sued, he argued that the contract didn't specify a deadline, which it didn't. Rome responded by introducing time expectations into contracts, because someone weaponized procrastination. Asterisk, and honestly, that feels timeless. Asterisk let's talk about voting. Roman voting was public, loud, socially intense. You voted in assemblies. People watched. People judged. Peer pressure was the whole system. Asterisk one man decided to show up and vote extremely slowly, painfully slowly. He took so long that voting sessions dragged on. Others couldn't vote. The day ended. Assemblies dissolved. He argued that nothing in the law required him to vote quickly. Rome passed regulations on voting order and timing. Because yes, one man stalled democracy. Asterisk now let's wander into slavery laws. Heavy topic, but we'll keep the tone calm. Romans had rules about the treatment of enslaved people. Limited, but present, especially regarding cruelty. Owners could be punished for extreme abuse. Asterisk one owner figured out that the law prohibited beating a slave to death, but didn't prohibit forcing them into dangerous situations. So he made enslaved people perform extremely risky labor. Accidents happened. Tragic accidents. He argued he never laid a hand on them. Rome expanded the definition of cruelty, because morality kept getting outpaced by technicality. Asterisk let's soften things slightly with something bizarre instead. Public seating. Asterisk Roman theaters had assigned seating by class. Senators here, equites there, everyone else somewhere else. Very orderly. Very Roman. Asterisk one man sat sideways, not in a seat, but across to sections, physically occupying space without technically sitting in the wrong seat. Security didn't know what to do. The law said you couldn't sit in another class's seat. It didn't say you couldn't hover aggressively between them. Rome clarified seating rules. Because, of course, it did. Asterisk now let's drift into religious law. Rome tolerated many religions, as long as they didn't cause trouble, as long as they respected Roman authority, as long as they didn't meet secretly or loudly, or question anything important. Asterisk one group met openly, during the day, in public, and claimed religious exemption for activities that were usually restricted. When questioned, they said the law protected religious expression. Rome responded by defining which religions counted, because apparently all religions was too vague. Asterisk next up. Military law. Soldiers were subject to strict discipline. Desertion was illegal. Cowardice was illegal. Disobedience was illegal. One soldier technically stayed in formation, but refused to fight. He stood there, present, armed, still. When accused of cowardice, he argued that he never ran away, which was true. Rome introduced laws requiring active participation, because standing around menacingly apparently wasn't enough. Let's slow down with property law. Romans loved boundaries, property lines, fences, stones. Very serious stuff. One man moved his boundary stones at night, slowly, over time, inch by inch. When accused, he argued that he never moved them far enough at once to constitute theft. Rome responded by criminalizing gradual boundary movement. Because slow crime was still crime. Now let's talk about names. Roman names mattered. Citizenship, status, legacy. You couldn't just change your name casually. One man adopted multiple names, used different ones in different contexts, claimed privileges under each. When challenged, he argued that the law didn't limit name usage. Rome introduced stricter identity rules, because apparently alias culture was already thriving. Let's drift into fashion again. Roman women were expected to dress modestly. Certain garments signaled respectability. One woman wore all the correct garments, but made them sheer, technically dressed, practically scandalous. Rome updated fabric opacity guidelines, because someone tested that boundary. Now food, again. Because Romans never stopped regulating meals. There were rules about how many guests you could host. To prevent political plotting, one man hosted many dinners, each with a small number of guests. Back to back, same night, same house. Rome clarified cumulative guest limits, because loopholes apparently came with appetizers. Let's move gently into noise laws. Rome was loud, but there were limits, especially at night. One man sang, softly, constantly, all night. Not loud enough to qualify as disturbance, just enough to prevent sleep. Rome eventually addressed persistent nuisance behavior, because sleep deprivation apparently wasn't illegal yet. Now a fun one. Laws about throwing things. Romans prohibited throwing objects from buildings onto streets. Obvious safety concern. One man dropped things. He didn't throw them. Gravity did. Rome clarified that intentional dropping counted. Because yes. Someone argued physics. Let's talk about funerals again. Romans limited funeral expenses. No excessive displays. No over-the-top mourning. One family held a funeral that followed every rule, but repeated it for the same person multiple times. Rome clarified that you only get one funeral per corpse, because someone tried subscription mourning. Now let's drift into education. Teachers were regulated. Fees, conduct, curriculum. One teacher charged no fees. Accepted gifts. Rome reclassified gifts as payment, because semantics were exhausting everyone. And finally, let's end this part with something beautifully Roman. Bathroom laws. Public latrines existed. Shared, social. Very Rome. One man reserved a latrine by standing nearby and claiming intent to use it. 4 hours. Rome clarified reasonable usage time. Because even ancient people hated bathroom hogs. And so Rome continued. Law after law, clarification after clarification. Not because people were evil, but because people were clever and bored and willing to see how far they could go. By now, Roman law had layers. Old laws, new laws, clarifications of clarifications. And still, somehow, there were people who treated the entire system like a puzzle box. Not to uphold justice, just to see if they could break it politely. Let's begin with inheritance. Romans cared deeply about inheritance. Family lines, property, names continuing into the future. Very serious stuff. The law allowed citizens to name heirs in their wills. Sensible, straightforward. One man named himself as his own heir. When questioned, he argued that the law did not explicitly forbid it, and technically, it didn't. The result was legal chaos. Because if you inherit from yourself, nothing transfers. Taxes get weird. Authority gets weird. So Rome added a rule clarifying that heirs had to be someone else. Because someone took self-made man to literally. Now let's float gently into adoption. Roman adoption was common, political, strategic. Adults adopted adults. Families merged. Power shifted. Very elegant system. One man adopted someone, then immediately disowned them, repeatedly, over and over, using adoption and disownment as a legal switch to move property around without taxes. Rome stepped in and regulated adoption frequency, because apparently adoption had turned into financial parkour. Let's slide toward marriage law. Roman marriage came with rights, property sharing, social legitimacy, respectability. One man married, divorced, married again, to the same woman, repeatedly, sometimes within days, each time triggering legal benefits. Rome introduced waiting periods between marriages. Because someone turned matrimony into a legal vending machine. Now let's talk about debt. Romans lived with debt. Borrowed. Lent. Owed. It was part of life. One lender realized that the law capped interest rates, but didn't limit fees. So he charged processing costs, paper handling, spiritual inconvenience, completely legal. Rome responded by defining total loan cost. Because creativity was getting expensive. Let's drift into citizenship. Roman citizenship was valuable. It came with protections, privileges, prestige. One man claimed citizenship by acting like a citizen long enough that people assumed it was true. When challenged, he demanded proof he wasn't a citizen. Rome clarified documentation requirements. Because confidence apparently wasn't supposed to be a legal strategy. Now public office. Roman offices came with rules, term limits, eligibility, conduct. One official completed his term, then continued acting as if he still held office, giving orders, signing documents. People obeyed out of habit. When confronted, he argued that nothing explicitly said he had to stop. Rome added formal end-of-office declarations. Because muscle memory was not governance. Let's move into clothing again. Rome loved regulating appearance, togas, colors, status signals. One man wore a toga reserved for higher rank, but dyed it slightly off color, close enough to pass at a distance. Rome clarified acceptable shades, because yes, someone exploited the color wheel. Now let's go somewhere quiet. Into libraries. Rome had libraries, public ones, private ones. Knowledge mattered. One man checked out scrolls, never returned them, claimed that the law didn't specify return dates. Rome introduced borrowing limits, because hoarding philosophy texts was apparently a thing. Let's soften things with animals. Roman law covered livestock, ownership, responsibility. One man trained his animals to wander onto others' land. They ate crops. He claimed the animals acted independently. Rome clarified owner responsibility, because outsourcing crime to goats was not acceptable. Now markets. Roman markets were regulated. Weights, measures, fairness. One merchant used correct weights, but hollowed them out. Same weight, less substance. Rome updated inspection rules, because deception had gone artisanal. Let's drift into theater. Roman entertainment mattered. Crowds, order, seating again. One performer refused to leave the stage, ever. Claimed that the law didn't specify performance duration. Rome clarified time limits, because performance art had gone too far. Now religious oaths. Romans swore oaths seriously, to gods, to contracts, to people. One man swore oaths while mentally redefining words. When accused of breaking them, he argued that his internal definitions mattered. Rome responded by emphasizing common meaning, because thought crime wasn't enforceable, but word crime apparently was. Let's go to baths. Roman baths were social centers, regulated, timed. One man stayed in the bath all day, every day, preventing others from using facilities. Claimed no time limit existed. Rome introduced bathing schedules, because personal hygiene monopolies were not part of the plan. Now funerals again, because Rome could never stop regulating death. One man mourned loudly, excessively, professionally, for pay. He wasn't related to the deceased. Rome limited professional mourning, because grief for hire was apparently disruptive. Let's wander into roads. Roman roads were sacred, maintained, protected. One man parked his cart sideways, blocking traffic, claimed he wasn't moving. Rome clarified obstruction laws, because stationary chaos was still chaos. Now language. Latin mattered. Official documents were in Latin. One man submitted documents written in extremely obscure archaic Latin, technically valid, practically unreadable. Rome standardized legal language, because flexing vocabulary wasn't helpful. Let's move into crime reporting. Citizens were expected to report crimes. One man reported crimes constantly. Trivial ones, imaginary ones, exhausting the system. Rome introduced penalties for false or excessive reporting, because early spam existed. Now borders. Movement mattered. Passes, permissions. Asterisk one man crossed borders repeatedly in small increments, claiming each step was legal. Rome regulated cumulative movement, because walking slowly across borders was still crossing. Asterisk let's slow down again, because this is exhausting. And it probably was for them to dot asterisk by now. Roman law was massive, dense, detailed, exhausted. Not because Romans were foolish, but because humans are consistent. Given rules, we test them. Given limits, we lean on them. Given silence, we shout into it and see what echoes. Asterisk, and so Rome kept writing, adding, clarifying, tightening, not to stop crime entirely, but to stop one specific guy, each time, over and over. This is where laws stop sounding like principles and start sounding like stories. Very specific stories about very specific people, probably still alive, probably still annoying everyone. Asterisk let's begin with public speech. Romans valued rhetoric, debates, speeches in forums. It was how politics worked. Asterisk one man spoke forever, calmly, slowly, without breaks. He never insulted anyone, never incited violence. He just spoke until assemblies dissolved from exhaustion. When challenged, he said the law protected free speech. Rome introduced time limits on speeches, because freedom apparently needed a stopwatch. Asterisk now let's move to celebrations. Festivals were regulated. Dates, processions, noise levels. Asterisk one man celebrated early, then late, then continuously, claimed it was one extended festival. Rome clarified festival duration, because someone tried to party legally forever. Asterisk let's drift into military logistics. Soldiers received supplies, rations, equipment. Asterisk one officer collected supplies for his unit, then reassigned the unit, kept the supplies, claimed the law didn't require redistribution. Rome fixed that, because hoarding swords was frowned upon. Asterisk now taxes. Rome loved taxes, hated evasion. Asterisk one citizen paid taxes, in coins so worn they were barely recognizable. Technically valid currency. Rome updated coinage standards, because paying taxes in dust was not the vibe. Asterisk let's slow into housing law. Buildings mattered. Fire hazards mattered. Asterisk one landlord rented rooms with ceilings, so low tenants couldn't stand upright. Claimed they were still rooms. Rome defined minimum room height, because crawling wasn't acceptable housing. Asterisk now slaves again. Rome regulated manumission, the freeing of enslaved people. Asterisk one owner freed slaves temporarily, then reclaimed them, using loopholes to avoid obligations. Rome restricted conditional freedom, because freedom with an asterisk was still a problem. Asterisk let's wander into water law. Aqueducts, public fountains, sacred infrastructure. Asterisk one man diverted public water slightly, just a trickle, claimed it didn't reduce flow meaningfully. Rome criminalized even minor diversion, because stealing water drop by drop was still theft. Asterisk now education again. Teachers, tutors, philosophers. Asterisk one philosopher taught nonsense, complete nonsense, claimed philosophy had no standards. Rome regulated who could teach. Because vibes alone were not credentials. Asterisk let's go to prisons. Rome had them. Temporary holding spaces. Asterisk one prisoner refused to leave after release. Claimed the law didn't require him to exit. Rome clarified release procedures. Because squatters apparently existed everywhere. Asterisk now marriage again. Always marriage. Asterisk one couple remained married legally, but lived entirely separate lives. Using marriage status for benefits only. Rome clarified marital obligations. Because marriage as a tax shelter was getting awkward. Asterisk let's drift into religion one last time. Sacred spaces. Temples. Asterisk one man slept in a temple permanently. Claimed religious devotion. Rome defined acceptable worship duration. Because temples were not hotels. Asterisk now public health. Rome cared about disease. Sanitation. Asterisk one citizen dumped waste just outside city limits. Technically legal. Rome expanded sanitation zones. Because moving trash 3 steps away wasn't solving anything. Asterisk let's soften with something small. Street vendors. Asterisk one vendor sold items for free. Accepted suggested donations. Rome regulated indirect sales. Because charity with pressure was still commerce. Asterisk now courts again. Judges. Procedures. Asterisk one litigant filed motions constantly. Endless appeals. Minor technicalities. Rome limited procedural abuse. Because paperwork was becoming a weapon. Asterisk let's talk about exile. Rome used exile often. Asterisk one man exiled himself. Preemptively. Claimed immunity from punishment. Rome clarified state-controlled exile. Because self-exile was apparently a loophole. Asterisk now inheritance again. Always inheritance. Asterisk one family divided inheritance into absurdly small fractions. Delaying transfer indefinitely. Rome mandated reasonable division timelines. Because waiting forever was not legal planning. Asterisk let's slow down now. Because this is the end. And Rome is tired. Asterisk by this point. Roman law was massive, precise, exhausted. It tried to anticipate everything, and still failed. Because no system can outpace human creativity forever. Asterisk what all these laws reveal is something quiet and familiar. Rome didn't fall because it lacked rules. It drowned in them. Every loophole closed revealed another. Every clever criminal inspired another statute. Not because people were evil, but because people were curious and stubborn and very good at asking, what if I did this instead? Asterisk so, as we settle into the final calm of this story, imagine Rome at night. Quiet streets, stone buildings. Somewhere, a senator rubbing his temples. Somewhere else, a citizen reading the law and smiling slowly. Because he thinks he's found something. Again. Asterisk, and that's the real legacy here. Not the laws themselves, but the eternal dance between rules and rule breakers. Ancient Rome, modern life, same energy, different paperwork. Asterisk so let the noise fade. Let the footnotes blur. And remember, somewhere in history, there was always one person, just smart enough, just annoying enough, to make everyone else write a law about them. The Victorian coal stove rested in the kitchen like a silent ruler made of iron. It stood heavy and still, giving off warmth, dark dust, and a sense of command over the room. Advertisements praised it as a wonder of progress. The fire was contained. The heat could be guided. Fuel was used more carefully than before. On paper, it sounded like control. In everyday life, the stove behaved more like a creature that demanded constant attention. It needed to be fed again and again. If ignored, even briefly, it reacted without mercy. Coal never appeared inside the stove by itself. Someone had to bring it in, scoop by scoop, bucket by bucket. This work was usually done by women or household servants, often early in the morning, before the rest of the house had fully woken. Ash from the previous day still covered the floor and lingered in the air. Each morning began with scraping out old remains, lifting heavy fuel, breathing in dust, and quietly wishing the stove would behave today. Compared to open fireplaces, the coal stove claimed accuracy. Instruction books spoke calmly about baking, boiling, and roasting with measured confidence. The stove rarely followed instructions. Heat shifted without warning. The quality of coal mattered. The dampness in the air mattered. The mood of the chimney mattered. Even the way the fire had been stirred could change everything. Adding too much coal turned the oven into something dangerously hot. Adding too little meant undercooked food and embarrassment. There were no dials, no numbers, no clear signs. Only habit, guesswork, and burned skin guided the cook. To test the oven, a hand was pushed inside, and seconds were counted until pain forced it back out. This was an early form of measuring heat, one that slowly removed feeling from fingers over time. Smoke never truly left the kitchen. Chimneys blocked. Air reversed direction. On bad days, grey clouds filled the room. Eyes burned. Breathing became harder. Food absorbed the smell whether it was wanted or not. Everything carried a hint of coal, including the person cooking. Windows were opened even in the coldest months, because breathing mattered more than warmth. Clothing brushed against hot iron and caught fire without warning. A simple task could suddenly become deadly. Progress brought risk quietly. The stove added new dangers while pretending to make life easier. Iron stayed hot long after flames died. Pots grew heavier. Lids snapped shut without mercy. Boiling water was lifted higher than before, closer to the body. When spills happened, injuries followed. Burns were common, expected, and rarely discussed. A skilled cook was known by scars, worn like proof of experience. Despite all of this, the coal stove became the center of the home. Every meal depended on it. Daily routines followed its needs. When it failed, everything stopped. It was not just a tool. It was a daily agreement with heat, smoke, and tiredness. Made long before anyone thought cooking should be easy. Before cold storage became common. Keeping food safe relied mostly on hope. Air movement helped. Shade helped. Wooden cabinets with wire sides, called meat safes, were used to protect food from insects, animals, and small hands. These boxes were placed near windows or in cool corners, wherever a breeze might pass. Freshness was not guaranteed. It had to be checked again and again. The idea was simple. Moving air slowed spoilage. Darkness reduced warmth. Wire blocked flies. In reality, insects were clever, germs unseen, and summer heat unforgiving. Meat hung from hooks or rested on stone, slowly changing through the day. Cooks examined it closely, smelling it, pressing it, cutting away parts that seemed wrong. Boiling was trusted to fix most problems. This belief was strong and only sometimes proved dangerous. Salt, vinegar, and spices were used heavily, often not for taste, but to hide flaws. Strong seasoning covered many mistakes. When meat began to fail, it was not thrown away. It was changed. A roast became a hash. Hash became a pie. Pie became soup, boiled long enough to silence concern. Nothing was wasted. Illness was accepted as bad luck. The meat safe also showed social difference. Wealthier homes owned larger versions, sometimes lined with metal or stone. They could afford ice during hot months. Poorer families relied on thin wood or open hooks, hoping for cool nights. In cities, so it settled on exposed food, adding a faint industrial flavor no recipe mentioned. Even so, the meat safe was praised as an improvement. It looked orderly. It looked modern. It suggested control over decay, even when that control existed mostly in imagination. Homes took pride in these cabinets. Shelves were cleaned. Wire was tightened. The act of cleaning felt like protection against time itself. The danger was that food often looked safe long after it was not. Smell could not always be trusted. Cooking hid problems until sickness appeared. Food illness was common. It was rarely named, often blamed on weak bodies or bad air. Still, the meat safe remained, quietly holding meals that balanced nourishment with risk. It was the clumsy ancestor of refrigeration, sincere, flawed, and confident it was helping. When the icebox arrived, it felt like a small miracle. For the first time, cold could be planned. Food could be kept cool by design, not chance. These wooden cabinets, lined with metal and packed with insulation, promised real freshness through blocks of ice. The miracle had rules. Ice had to be delivered. Blocks were heavy. They melted. They leaked. They demanded schedules and strong backs. Cold was finally possible, but comfort was still far away. The icebox arrived in the home with the help of the Iceman. He carried large blocks of ice that had been cut from frozen lakes during winter and stored for months in dark, insulated buildings until summer heat returned. These blocks were solid, heavy, and always dripping water as they were dragged through kitchens, leaving wet trails across the floor. The icebox needed regular attention. Ice had to be replaced often, and timing mattered. If the delivery came too late, the inside grew warm and damp. If it came too early, melting water flooded the lower section. Keeping things cool became a daily task, not something that happened on its own. Food placement inside the icebox required thought. Milk was kept close to the ice, but not pressed against it. Butter needed to stay firm without turning hard. Meat rested on shelves designed to catch drips, because nothing ruined a meal faster than old liquid collecting beneath fresh food. Everything inside shared the same air and moisture, though the term was not known yet. Contamination moved freely. Cleanliness was praised in theory. In reality, Ice boxes were rarely as clean as promised. Melted water had to be emptied by hand, and if forgotten, it became a place where smells and unseen growth thrived. The metal lining bent and cracked. The wooden outer frame soaked up odors that never truly left. Scrubbing helped, but certain smells, especially fish, seemed to stay forever. Asterisk cold made people feel safe, sometimes without reason. The icebox also showed social difference. Ice delivery cost money. Wealthy homes enjoyed steady cold. Poorer families made one block last as long as possible. Treating cool air like a precious resource. During heat waves, ice was often saved for drinks or the sick, leaving food to manage without it. Asterisk even with its problems, the icebox changed how people thought about food. Freshness could now be extended instead of simply hoped for. Leftovers lasted longer. Milk stayed usable for more time. Some illnesses became less common, though the reasons were not fully understood. Danger did not disappear. It was delayed. Cold proved powerful, but demanding. The icebox offered control over spoilage, but only to those willing to plan around melting water. Delivery days and the constant drip that reminded everyone that progress faded quickly. Asterisk Victorian kitchens also welcomed hand-powered machines that promised speed and order. Mechanical grinders were praised as symbols of efficiency. Meat grinders, spice crushers, and mincers appeared in catalogues, shown beside women turning handles with ease. Asterisk reality was harder. These machines resisted every turn. Grinders were clamped tightly to tables, turning household furniture into work equipment. Meat had to be cut carefully, because sinew jammed gears without mercy. When the handle stopped, it did not stop gently. It fought back. Asterisk cooks leaned into the crank with full body weight. Arms grew strong from repetition. Children were often asked to help, their smaller hands suited to endless turning. Cleaning the grinder was a task no one enjoyed. Bits of food, stuck deep inside, refusing to come out without tools, hot water, or frustrated words. Asterisk if cleaning was rushed. Yesterday's remains became today's taste. Rust appeared quickly, especially in damp kitchens. Shiny metal turned dull and orange. Many families accepted this as normal. Asterisk grinders brought new risks. Fingers slipped, sleeves caught, hair brushed close to moving parts. Small injuries happened often and were rarely recorded. Instructions warned vaguely about care, assuming endless attention. The machine did not stop for pain. It simply continued. Asterisk still, grinders changed cooking deeply. Minced meat allowed new dishes, sausages, meatballs, and patties stretched small portions to feed many mouths. Tough cuts became usable. Spices could be crushed fresh, improving flavor and hiding age. Smooth texture became fashionable, linked with control and refinement. Asterisk there was also a mental shift. Grinding removed the clear shape of the animal. Meat became something processed, easier to accept in cities where people were uncomfortable with slaughter. The machine stood between cook and creature, seen as progress. Asterisk despite effort and danger, grinders stayed. They represented work turned into output. Pain justified by results. Kitchens did not grow kinder. They grew louder, busier, and more mechanical. The grinder was not a comfort. It was a small factory. At the table, reminding cooks that modern meals were built one sore wrist at a time. Asterisk as gas pipes spread through cities, kitchens gained a new and uneasy invention. Gas lighting came first, then gas cooking. Compared to coal, gas felt clean and quick. No fuel hauling, no ash clearing. Turn a knob, light a match, and fire appeared. Asterisk this felt miraculous. It was also risky. Gas heated instantly, exciting cooks used to waiting. Heat could be adjusted mid-cooking. Water boiled quickly. Kitchens became brighter at night, extending work hours beyond daylight. Asterisk productivity increased. So did tiredness. Kitchens now worked whenever needed, not when the sun allowed. The danger was invisible. Gas leaks were common. Pipes loosened. Valves were left slightly open. Smell was not always strong enough to warn. Asterisk fumes built quietly, causing headaches and dizziness. These effects were blamed on fatigue. Carbon monoxide had no name yet, only harm. Explosions were rare, but unforgettable. Newspapers told of kitchens destroyed by a single spark. Asterisk more often. Damage was slow. Long exposure weakened health, especially for servants who stayed near flames for hours. Gas was praised as clean because it left no soot, ignoring what it left in lungs. Asterisk gas changed the feeling of fire. Coal burned visibly and steadily. Gas flames were quiet and calm. Flickering blue. This encouraged carelessness. Flames went out silently. Gas kept flowing. Safety was often learned after close calls. Asterisk still. Gas spread quickly. It symbolized city life and science. Manuals promised safety with proper use. Proper use depended on systems. Still learning not to harm people. Gas brought speed and control, along with unseen risk. Asterisk Victorian kitchens also began to use water differently. Indoor plumbing, where available, changed everything. Taps and drains replaced buckets. Water could be summoned, used freely, and discarded easily. Asterisk this felt modern. It also brought new strain. More water meant more washing. Hands, tools, food, and surfaces were cleaned often. Cleanliness was praised as moral and scientific, even before germs were fully understood. Asterisk kitchens became damp places. Floors stayed wet. Steam filled the air. Combined with heat, the space grew heavy and exhausting. Sweat mixed with soap and hot water. Steam became both helper and threat. Boiling pots released clouds that fogged windows and lungs. Lids slipped. Kettles screamed. Burns from hot water were very common and almost expected. They were seen as less dramatic than burns from open flames, even though the damage was often just as painful. Water felt safer because people had always lived with it. This belief made injuries easier to accept. Plumbing also brought problems that were not easy to see. Pipes froze during winter, cracked without warning, or leaked slowly inside walls and floors. Dirty water caused sickness that seemed to have nothing to do with the kitchen. This confused families who believed that washing and cleanliness alone could protect them. Cooks were often blamed for results they could not prevent. As water became more important in cooking, new tools appeared alongside it. Steamers, double pots, and water baths promised gentle cooking and better nutrition. These methods demanded close attention. Time mattered. Water levels had to be checked again and again. Forgetting for even a short while led to burned pots or empty pans. Where water had boiled away completely, cooking slowly changed from a skill guided by feeling into one controlled by watching and waiting. Water also changed how kitchens were ranged. Sinks became the center of activity. Movement around the room shifted. Some people learned to manage this well. Others felt buried under constant care and repair. More tools meant more washing. More washing meant more work. Much of this work happened late at night after meals were finished. As kitchens embraced water and steam, they moved closer to modern food science. Boiling, blanching, and sterilizing food felt safer and more reliable. Still, confidence grew faster than understanding. Water could clean, but it could also spread harm. It could nourish or injure. The kitchen slowly became a testing space without clear rules, where progress flowed freely from taps and settled into floors, air, and bodies alike. As Victorian kitchens filled with new tools, storage became a matter of survival. Shelves, drawers, and cupboards multiplied. Each had a role in slowing spoilage, blocking insects, and keeping order. Nothing could be left out in the open. Everything needed a place that delayed decay long enough to matter. Pantries were built on the coolest side of the house, away from sunlight. Shelves were often made of stone or marble, believed to resist pests and hold coolness. Wood shelves remained common, even though they bent, cracked, and absorbed smells that never fully faded. Flour soaked up moisture. Sugar hardened into solid blocks. Tea absorbed nearby scents until it lost its own identity. Storage was not truly about preservation. It was about managing slow decline. Containers became more specialized. Tin boxes held dry goods. Glass jars stored preserves. Clay pots held fats and pickles. Each material came with flaws. Tin rusted. Glass broke. Clay chipped. Labels were written by hand and often wrong. Families relied on memory to track age and safety. Errors happened often. Rodents saw storage as an open invitation. Wire screens, traps, and raised shelves slowed them, but never stopped them. Insects arrived anyway. Weevils were tolerated. Ants were bargained with. Mold was scraped away if it seemed minor. Whole systems existed to decide when food crossed from usable to dangerous. These decisions differed from house to house. Order itself became a moral sign. A neat pantry suggested discipline and respect. Books warned that disorder caused waste and illness. In reality, disorder usually came from tiredness, not carelessness. Perfect storage required constant checking, rearranging, and cleaning. This work fell almost entirely on women and servants. More storage space encouraged keeping more food longer, which increased spoilage instead of preventing it. Leftovers lingered quietly. Ingredients aged without notice. Smells blended into a steady background of almost acceptable. Storage reflected a society trying to control nature indoors. Decay was slowed and managed. but never defeated. Every shelf and jar represented effort spent delaying loss. The kitchen became not only a place to cook, but a daily struggle between order and decline. Order rarely won. It simply lasted long enough to maintain hope. Victorian kitchen tools were often advertised as time-saving and efficient. In practice, they often increased work. Each new invention removed one task while adding several more. Coal stoves needed constant care. Ice boxes required planning. Grinders demanded strength. Storage demanded attention. Labor did not disappear. It spread and multiplied. Shiny metal and printed instructions hid the effort behind meals. Wealthy homes relied heavily on servants to manage this system. Cooks, washers, and helpers formed a strict structure built around fatigue. The cook controlled timing and technique. The washer handled endless cleaning. The kitchen helper fetched water and managed overflow work. Technology increased specialization, not rest. Homes without servants suffered more. Middle-class women were expected to manage everything alone while appearing calm and capable. Instruction books promised control, but ignored exhaustion. Efficiency assumed endless focus and energy. Working conditions were harsh. Kitchens were hot, wet, smoky, and loud. Long hours bent over sinks and stoves caused lasting pain. Burns, cuts, breathing trouble, and stiffness were accepted as normal. Complaints were seen as weakness. Success meant keeping the system running without visible failure. The idea of efficiency comforted society by hiding the human cost of food. If meals appeared on time, the system was assumed to work. Greater complexity reduced stability. When one part failed, everything collapsed. A broken pipe, melted ice, or jammed machine disrupted the whole kitchen. Skills became specialized. Losing an experienced cook meant losing order. Victorian kitchens looked modern and scientific, but survived on constant human effort. Machines did not replace labor. They controlled it. Efficiency was measured by output, not comfort. By the late Victorian period, kitchens would have amazed earlier generations. Controlled fire roared. Ice promised freshness. Gas pushed back darkness. Machines clattered. Water flowed freely. On paper, cooking was modern. In reality, it was louder, hotter, and more dangerous. Kitchens were workplaces shaped by heat, steam, and risk. Burns were common. Illness misunderstood. Tiredness ignored. Technology improved reliability, but increased strain. Every solution created new problems. Cleanliness improved while hidden dangers grew. Fire was controlled, but explosions happened. Cold preserved food briefly. These kitchens mattered deeply. They shaped everything that followed. Modern tools grew from Victorian struggle. Guesswork became gauges. Ice became refrigeration. Muscle became motors. Victorian cooks were not pioneers by choice. They simply wanted dinner without disaster. Their scars, habits, and adjustments quietly built the modern kitchen. Safety came through loss. Comfort came last. Progress was slow and difficult. Victorian kitchens pulled daily life into the industrial age, one aching arm at a time. They promised control and delivered it partially, at great cost. Every calm modern kitchen carries echoes of that noise, heat, and endurance. Progress was not gentle. It was earned the hard way, and it still hums quietly beneath every peaceful meal.
Today we will talk about a very old history topic. This story is from a time when there were no house, no cities, no schools and no books. This is the story of fire. Fire is not just a thing but that burns. Fire changed everything. Fire made human different from animals. Without fire, there would be no food like today, no protection, no progress, and maybe no modern world. This is the story of how fire slowly changed human life step by step. Long, long ago, humans were very weak. They had no clothes, no proper homes, and no weapons. They lived in forest and open land. They were always afraid. Big animals hunted them, cold weather hot there, dark nights scared them. Human ate raw food. Raw meat was hard to chew. Raw plants were bitter and dangerous. People got sick easily. Many people died young. Life was very hard. The first time humans saw fire. Yes, fire was not first made by human. Fire came from nature. Lighting heat trees, volcanoes burned land, dry forest caught fire. Early humans saw fire from far away. They saw bright light. They felt heat. At first, they were scared. Fire was dangerous. Fire burned skin. Fire destroyed trees. But humans are curious. They watched fire carefully. Slowly, humans understood something important. Fire is dangerous, but fire is also useful. Fire give heat, fire give light. People start keeping fire interested of running away. They carried burning wood from natural fire. They portrayed that fire carefully. If fire dead, life became hard again. Fire became like a friend. Fire and warmth. Cold weather was deadly before fire. Winter killed many people. People slept at night. Fire changed this. Fire kept human warm and people could live in a colder place. They could travel to new lands. Fire helped humans survive winter. This was a very big change in history. Fire and light. Before fire, night was very dark. Darkness brought fear. Wild animal hunted at night. Fire brought light. People could see at night. They could stay together. They could talk and think. This helped humans before social. This helped humans share idea. Fire created community. Fire and protection. Fire scared wild animal. Animal we are afraid of flame. They stayed away from fire. Humans used fire as protection. They slept near fire. This saved many lives. Fire became a side. Fire and cooked food. This was one of the biggest change in human history. Yes, human learned to cook food. Cooked meat was soft. Cooked plant were safe. People became stronger. Their brains grew bigger. Good food gave more energy. Scientists believe Cooking helped human become intelligent. Fire helped create the human brain. Fire and tools. Fire helped humans make tools. They hardened wood in fire. They shaped stone using heat. Later, fire helped me melt metal. This lead to copper tools. They bronze tools. They iron tools. Fire started technology. Fire and caves. Human lived in caves. Caves were dark and cold. Fire made caves livable. Fire kept animal away. Fire gave light inside cave. Human painted on cave walls using firelight. This was early art. This was early culture. Fire and social life. Fire brought people together. People sat around fire, they talked, they shared stories. This was the beginning of language, this was the beginning of tradition. Fire created human society, learned to make fire. At first, human protected natural fire. Later, they learned to make fire. They rubbed stones, they rubbed wood. This was a huge discovery. Now fire was always available. Human we are no longer dependent on nature. This was the freedom. Fire and migration. Fire allowed humans to move. They went to good lands. They crossed mountains. Fire helped humans spread across the world, from Africa to Asia, from Asia to Europe, from Europe to everywhere. Fire helped humans conquering that plant. Fire and religion. Fire became scared. People believe fire was a magic. People worshipped fire. Yes, many religions used fire. Fire rituals started. Fire became a symbol of life. Fire and farming. Fire helped clear forest. People burned land. This made farming possible. Yes, farming changed human life. People settled down. Villages formed and cities were born. Are you know? Fast start civilization. Fire and industry. Thousands of years later, fire powered machine, fire boiled water, steam and gas were born. Factors started, trains moved, fire became energy. Fire and modern world. Today, fire still help us. Electric comes from fire. Cooking or users use fire. Industries uses fire, and fire still saves human life. Conclusion: fire is not just that the fire is the history. Fire made humans human. Without fire, there would be no civilization, no cities, no technology. Fast is the greatest discovery in human history. This, thank you. Today, now this is a very interesting story. I am feeling very relaxed now, because I am try to very best now to please subscribe, like, and comment. Thank you. Today we will talk about a very old history topic. This story is from a time when there were no house, no cities, no schools, and no books. This is the story of Fire. Fire is not just a thing, but that burns. Fire changed everything. Fire made human different from animals. Without fire, there would be no food like today, no protection, no progress, and maybe no modern world. This is the story of how fire slowly changed human life step by step. Long, long ago, humans were very weak. They had no clothes, no proper homes, and no weapons. They lived in forest and open land. They were always afraid. Big animals hunted them, cold weather hot there, dark nights scared them. Human ate raw food. Raw meat was hard to chew. Raw plants were bitter and dangerous. People got sick easily. Many people died young. Life was very hard. The first time humans saw fire. Yes, fire was not first made by human. Fire came from nature. Lighting heat trees, volcanoes burned land, dry forest caught fire. Early humans saw fire from far away. They saw bright light. They felt heat. At first, they were scared. Fire was dangerous. Fire burned skin. Fire destroyed trees. But humans are curious. They watched fire carefully. Slowly, humans understood something important. Fire is dangerous, but fire is also useful. Fire give heat, fire give light. People start keeping fire interested of running away. They carried burning wood from natural fire. They portrayed that fire carefully. If fire dead, life became hard again. Fire became like a friend. Fire and warmth. Cold weather was deadly before fire. Winter killed many people. People shivered at night. Fire changed this. Fire kept human warms and people could live in a colder place. They could travel to new lands. Fire helped humans survive winter. This was a very big change in history. Fire and light. Before fire, night was very dark. Darkness brought fear. Wild animal hunted at night. Fire brought light. People could see at night. They could stay together. They could talk and think. This helped humans before social. This helped humans share idea. Fire created community. Fire and protection. Fire scared wild animal. Animal we are afraid of flame. They stayed away from fire. Humans used fire as protection. They slept near fire. This saved many lives. Fire became a side. Fire and cooked food. This was one of the biggest change in human history. Yes, human learned to cook food. Cooked meat was soft. Cooked plant were safe. People became stronger. Their brains grew bigger. Good food gave more energy. Scientists believe cooking helped human become intelligent. Fire helped create the human brain. Fire and tools. Fire helped humans make tools. They hardened wood in fire. They shaped stone using heat. Later, fire help me melt metal. This lead to copper tools. They bronze tools. They iron tools. Fire started technology. Fire and caves. Human lived in caves. Caves were dark and cold. Fire made caves livable. Fire kept animal away. Fire gave light inside cave. Human painted on cave walls using firelight. This was early art. This was early culture. Fire and social life. Fire brought people together. People sat around fire, they talked, they shared stories. This was the beginning of language, this was the beginning of tradition. Fire created human society, learned to make fire. At first, human protected natural fire. Later, they learned to make fire. They rubbed stones, they rubbed wood. This was a huge discovery. Now fire was always available. Human we are no longer dependent on nature. This was the freedom. Fire and migration. Fire allowed humans to move. They went to good lands. They crossed mountains. Fire helped humans spread across the world. From Africa to Asia, from Asia to Europe, from Europe to everywhere. Fire helped humans conquering that plant. Fire and religion. Religion. Fire became scared. People believe fire was a magic. People worshipped fire. Yes, many religions used fire. Fire rituals started. Fire became a symbol of life. Fire and farming. Fire helped clear forest. People burned land. This made farming possible. Yes, farming changed human life. People settled down. Villages formed and cities were born. Are you know? Fast start civilization. Fire and industry. Thousands of years later, fire powered machine, fire boiled water, steam and gas were born. Factors started, trains moved, fire became energy. Fire and modern world. Today, fire still help us. Electric comes from fire. Cooking or users use fire. Industries uses fire, and fire still saves human life. Conclusion: fire is not just that the fire is the history. Fire made humans human. Without fire, there would be no civilization, no cities, no technology. Fast is the greatest discovery in a human history. This, thank you. Today, now this is a very interesting story. I am feeling very relaxed now because I am try to very best now to please subscribe, like, and comment. Thank you.